Imagine saving every dime with the man you thought you'd spend your life with, only to find out he used it to marry his ex. That's my story. Stick with me while I share it. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Emily Parker, and for 4 years I was engaged to a man named Jason Miller. To me, he was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We met when I was 25, and from the start, Jason seemed solid, dependable, and loving. I trusted him completely. He talked about our future together, the house we'd buy, the kids we'd raise, and the life we'd build. We started saving money side by side, putting everything we could into a joint account that was supposed to be for our future home. I worked long hours, skipped vacations, and cut corners everywhere I could. Every time I looked at that account, I felt proud because it meant we were getting closer to the dream Jason and I shared. But I had no idea that dream wasn't real, at least not for him. Jason had an ex, Vanessa Reed. I'd heard her name before but never thought much of it. He brushed her off as part of his past, someone who wasn't important anymore. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We were engaged. He told me he loved me every day. But behind my back, Jason had reconnected with her. At first, it was just messages, then calls, and then he started seeing her again. I didn't know any of this at the time. What I did notice was that Jason started acting strange. He was coming home later than usual, saying work was stressful, and he guarded his phone more than before. Whenever I asked, he'd snap at me for being too controlling. I hated fighting, so I let it go. I told myself I was just overthinking. After all, we were planning a wedding of our own, or so I thought. The truth hit me like a punch to the chest. I logged into our savings account one afternoon just to check on things, and nearly fainted when I saw the balance. It was almost empty. More than $42,000, money I had sweated and sacrificed for, was gone. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, maybe some kind of fraud. I called Jason frantic, but he didn't answer. That night when he came home, I demanded to know what happened. He didn't even try to lie. He looked me straight in the face and said, "I used it. Vanessa and I are married now." I never stopped loving her. I stood there frozen, feeling like my world collapsed in a single second. My fiancé, the man I trusted, had used my savings to marry his ex. And worse than the betrayal was the way he said it, as if I had been nothing more than a placeholder until she came back. That was the night I decided I would never let them get away with what they did to me. My hands were shaking so badly on the steering wheel that I almost missed the turn into his parents' driveway. I didn't care that it was late, didn't care that his whole family might be inside. My chest burned with rage, and before I could think twice, I slammed the car door and stormed up the porch steps. The door wasn't even locked. I pushed it open and walked straight into the living room where Jason sat with Vanessa, his parents nearby like nothing was wrong. Their laughter died the second they saw me, standing there pale and furious. "Where is my money, Jason?" My voice cracked, but it was loud enough to echo through the room. His mother shifted uncomfortably, but he just leaned back on the couch like he had been expecting. "You mean our money?" he said, calm as stone. "It's gone. I used it. I told you before. You were never the one, Emily. Vanessa always was. I never stopped loving her. You were just safe, stable, until she came back." His words cut through me sharper than glass. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but I couldn't even breathe. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. Then Vanessa lifted her hand, tilting it so the light caught a diamond ring I instantly recognized. My stomach twisted. She smirked, her lips curling in satisfaction. "Beautiful, isn't it? It suits me better anyway," she said, like twisting the knife wasn't enough without her voice dripping with arrogance. My knees wobbled, but I stayed standing, forcing myself not to fall apart in front of them. Jason didn't look sorry. He didn't look guilty. He looked like someone who thought he had finally won. I clenched my fists so tight my nails dug into my palm. Hot tears blurred my vision, but I didn't wipe them away. They didn't deserve to see me break. Inside, though, I was crumbling. My heart screamed with betrayal, and for a moment, all I wanted was to disappear, to erase myself from the humiliation of standing there while they gloated. But underneath the pain, something colder stirred. I swore to myself in that moment, silently, fiercely, that they wouldn't get away with this. They had stolen from me, used me, laughed at me. I couldn't change what they'd done, but I could decide what came next. And I decided right then, this wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning of theirs unraveling. For days I moved through the apartment like a ghost, answering to nothing and no one. I stopped replying to texts, let calls slide to voicemail, and kept the curtains drawn even in the afternoon. Friends dropped by and left plates of food on the counter. I ate mechanically like a machine. Everything felt too loud or too small, a stranger's life squeezed into my chest. I couldn't stand mirrors because they reflected a person I didn't recognize, drained, trembling, and unbearably exposed. Rachel was the first to break through my silence. She arrived with a thermos of coffee and that blunt, steady look she uses when someone needs leveling. Tom showed up later, awkward and earnest, offering jokes that landed like soft punches, just enough to force a smile. They sat with me for hours, not demanding explanations, only handing me space and the occasional shove back toward the world. Their presence felt like light through a hairline crack, weak, but enough to stop me from collapsing entirely. At one point, while we were sorting through the paperwork on my kitchen table, Rachel paused over a lease agreement and frowned. She tapped the paper as if testing the ink. "You signed this," she said simply. "You guaranteed the place." I stared at the words, the legalese suddenly monstrous and unfamiliar. How had I missed that line? My signature, in black ink, tethered me to decisions I didn't make alone. Tom leaned in, reading the clause aloud. His voice was flat with concern. The implication hit me slow, like a tide rolling back to reveal rocks. If Rachel was right, I had leverage, something I had thought lost. For the first time since everything imploded, a different kind of heartbeat started under my ribs. Not the frantic, collapsing kind, but a small, cold pulse of calculation. I couldn't pretend I wasn't hurt. Shame and anger tangled into something raw that made sleep impossible. Yet alongside the ache, that newly found fact grew into an idea. It wasn't grand or dramatic at first. It simply sat there, practical and relentless. If I had a legal foothold, maybe I could use it. Maybe the balance could be nudged back toward me. Rachel and Tom watched the shift in my expression, and they didn't need me to explain. Their quiet support was less about sympathy and more about strategy. I began to plan in small, steady steps, gathering facts and quietly checking timelines. Pain still throbbed, but now it was edged with purpose. The humiliation didn't vanish, but it hardened into resolve. And from that place, I started to sketch the first lines of a plan. I sat at the table long after Rachel and Tom left, the lease spread open in front of me. My eyes followed the lines again and again until the words started to sharpen into something new. Jason and Vanessa weren't standing on their own the way they pretended. The landlord wouldn't have approved them without a backer, and that backer was me. Every month, every key they held was tied to my signature. Without it, their perfect little nest wasn't as secure as they thought. I flipped through another folder, one I hadn't touched since Jason and I first moved in together. Tucked inside was the agreement for our old storage unit. My name appeared at the top, bold and unshakable, with his listed second. He had left it that way, maybe too careless or too arrogant to notice. I stared at that page for a long moment, the corners digging into my fingers. The realization spread slowly, almost like heat creeping into frozen hands. For weeks I had been drowning, convinced they stripped me of everything. But here, in black and white, was proof they weren't free from me at all. They still stood on foundations I had built, paperwork I had signed. I leaned back in the chair, the silence of the apartment pressing in. For the first time since everything crumbled, I felt something tilt in my direction. Not hope. I didn't believe in that anymore, but leverage. A way to tilt the balance of power so they'd feel the ground shift beneath them, the way I had. The more I read, the clearer it became. Jason and Vanessa weren't untouchable. Their comfort, their security, even their ability to settle into that shiny new apartment, all of it rested on strings I still held. And if I chose to pull them, everything they thought was solid would fall apart. I closed the folders and stacked them neatly, my hands steady for the first time in weeks. The air felt different in the room, sharper, like I was finally breathing something that belonged to me. They had taken my money, my trust, my future. But they had overlooked the details, and those details were mine. That was the night the dynamic shifted, and I knew I was no longer the one cornered. The next morning I opened a fresh folder and began filling it with everything that proved what Jason had done. Printed statements showed the transfers leaving our account, each withdrawal sitting like a bruise on the page. I highlighted the amounts, circled dates, and clipped them together so there could be no confusion. Line after line of numbers told the story better than I ever could. Once the paperwork was organized, I dialed the landlord's office. My voice trembled at first, but I forced it steady, asking direct questions about my obligations and rights. The woman on the other end confirmed what I needed to hear. My name wasn't just decorative. I had authority tied to that lease, authority I could exercise. I thanked her politely, keeping my tone calm, even though a current of satisfaction hummed under the surface. That evening I drove across town to the storage facility. The metal doors rattled as I unlocked ours, the space smelling faintly of dust and old wood. I walked through slowly, touching boxes and furniture that had once been part of a shared dream. Bit by bit, I began separating what was mine. I loaded the car carefully, photographs, family heirlooms, even the small lamp my grandmother gave me. Each trip to the trunk felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. I didn't rush. Every movement was deliberate, quiet, controlled. Jason wouldn't notice right away, and that was exactly how I wanted it. By the time he realized, the shelves would be stripped of anything that tied me to him. He would be left staring at an empty space, wondering how it disappeared so quickly. Back at my apartment, I stacked the boxes against the wall and sat among them, breathing in the faint smell of cedar and old paper. The ache in my chest hadn't vanished, but beneath it ran a steady, calculating rhythm. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about precision, about setting each piece in place before cutting the floor out from under him. Every signature, every item, every conversation with the landlord was another step in a quiet march forward. No one else needed to know. Jason and Vanessa thought they had won, but I was already arranging the strings they didn't realize were tightening around them. Word of their celebration reached me without effort. People in town whispered about the extravagant decorations, the overflowing guest list, and how Jason and Vanessa couldn't stop showing off their so-called new beginning. Everywhere I turned, someone mentioned the event, their voices tinged with envy or curiosity. I listened quietly, not adding a word, storing each detail until the picture was complete. It wasn't difficult to discover where they planned to go once the party ended. The apartment I had helped secure was meant to be their first stop as husband and wife. They had spoken openly about moving in that very night, treating it as the crowning jewel of their union. I kept my expression blank when I heard this, though inside something cold and steady settled deeper into place. At home, I laid out the forms I had gathered. The landlord's office had already explained the process, and all that remained was my signature. With one stroke of a pen, I made their arrangement fragile. The paper felt heavier than it should, its edges crisp beneath my hand. I slid it back into an envelope, sealing the decision like a promise. When evening fell, I drove once again to the storage facility. The corridor echoed as I rolled up the door. Inside, the air was still, boxes stacked neatly where I had left them. This time I didn't sort slowly. I worked with purpose, moving every last possession that belonged to me. My car filled quickly, the weight pressing down as though I was hauling away not just objects but years of history. By the time I finished, the unit was nearly barren. A folding chair, a cracked lamp Jason had insisted on keeping, a couple of worthless odds and ends. That was all I left behind. The rest, everything of value or meaning, came with me. I shut the door with a firm clang and twisted the lock, the sound ringing down the hallway like a final note. On the outside, nothing betrayed the storm inside me. I carried myself calmly, quietly, letting each step fall with deliberate ease. But beneath that calm ran certainty. While Jason and Vanessa toasted their future, I was pulling away the ground beneath their feet. They would walk from the glow of their reception straight into an emptiness they hadn't anticipated, and I would be waiting for the silence that followed. The night arrived with music and laughter spilling from the banquet hall across town. While they basked in attention, I sat at my kitchen table with the documents already signed and sealed. The clock ticked softly, each second marking the distance between their illusions and the reality about to unfold. I slipped the envelope into my bag and drove through quiet streets, headlights gliding over pavement like a secret no one else could see. At the landlord's office, a night drop box waited. I slid the envelope inside, the sound faint but final. That single act shifted everything. The guarantee was gone, their lease suddenly fragile, their future balanced on rules they never bothered to understand. No shouting, no accusations, just the silent weight of paperwork doing its work. From there I headed to the storage facility. The corridors glowed under harsh fluorescent lights, casting long shadows against the row of doors. At mine, a locksmith was already waiting, his tools laid out neatly. He worked quickly, metal clinking in short bursts until the mechanism clicked. The old lock dropped into his hand, replaced by a new one I alone controlled. Inside, the unit looked bare. My belongings were already safe in my apartment. What remained were odds and ends Jason had insisted on keeping. Things that once seemed important to him but now stood abandoned, trapped behind steel. Clothes, mismatched furniture, pieces of a life he thought would always be available. With the new lock secure, that access ended. When the locksmith left, I stayed for a moment, my hand resting against the cool surface of the door. I didn't write a note, didn't leave behind a single word. They would return expecting everything to be as they left it, only to find silence and barriers they couldn't push through. Driving home, the city seemed unusually quiet. No one knew what had just been set in motion, no one except me. While their celebration carried on with champagne and music, my own satisfaction came in stillness. I hadn't shouted or begged. I hadn't warned them. The system itself would close around them, piece by piece, until the picture of control they had painted dissolved. I pulled into my driveway, switched off the engine, and sat for a moment in the dark. There was no need to imagine the chaos that would come. It was already inevitable, written in ink and locked behind steel. The reception had barely ended when the newlyweds pulled up to the complex, still dressed in lace and tuxedo black. Laughter trailed behind them as a handful of friends followed, curious to see the start of their new life. But instead of stepping into a polished home, they were met with the sight of the landlord standing by the doorway, a maintenance worker crouched over the knob with tools scattered at his feet. Confusion turned quickly to panic. Vanessa clutched her dress, demanding to know what was happening, her voice shrill enough to carry down the block. Jason shoved past, insisting it was a mistake, that the unit was his. The landlord barely looked up as he explained the paperwork. The guarantee had been withdrawn, and without it, their tenancy was no longer valid. His tone was professional, unshaken by their outrage, as if this was just another eviction on his calendar. Faces in the small crowd shifted from amusement to discomfort. Some whispered, others smirked behind hands, but no one intervened. Watching a bride and groom locked out of their supposed home was spectacle enough. Vanessa's cheeks burned crimson beneath her veil, while Jason's jaw clenched tight, his bravado cracking with each failed attempt to argue. At last, in a fit of desperation, Jason pulled out his phone. My screen lit up seconds later with his name flashing. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before pressing block. The silence that followed felt cleaner than any words I could have thrown at him. By morning, the story traveled faster than wildfire. At the diner, waitresses shook their heads over coffee cups. Neighbors retold the scene in vivid detail, their voices tinged with disbelief and a hint of satisfaction. The perfect couple, the ones who had strutted through town bragging about their new chapter, had been denied a front door on the very night they tied the knot. In a place as small as ours, nothing stayed secret for long. By the end of the day, everyone knew the fairy tale had ended before it even began. The first call never made it through, but Jason didn't stop trying. New numbers appeared on my phone one after another, each voicemail more frantic than. By the 3rd day, his tone had shifted from anger to pleading. His words cracked with desperation, admitting he had made a mistake, that things weren't supposed to turn out this way. He swore he still cared for me, that he only wanted a chance to fix it. The sound of him crying through the receiver was jarring, but I didn't respond. His regret wasn't for me, it was for the comfort he lost. Vanessa's reaction was different. I heard through neighbors that she shouted in the parking lot, her voice carrying in the night. She hurled blame at him for ruining their plans, accusing him of being careless, selfish, and incompetent. More than once, people spotted her storming off toward her parents' house, only to return hours later, still seething. Their glossy image cracked so loudly the whole town could hear it. With nowhere else to go, they resorted to the last option available, Jason's aging sedan. Parked on the curb outside the building they thought belonged to them, it became their makeshift bedroom. The back seat filled with crumpled clothes and scattered belongings. Curtains from nearby windows twitched at the sight of a bride and groom reduced to sleeping in a car. The shine of their celebration dulled in just a matter of days. One evening I walked past at a distance, unseen in the shadows. The sight stopped me cold. Jason sat in the driver's seat with his head in his hands, while Vanessa glared out the window, her arms folded tight across her chest. The contrast between the glittering reception I'd imagined and this grim reality was sharp. For the first time since the betrayal, a small measure of balance returned. I didn't speak to them, didn't make my presence known. I simply observed in silence, the ache in my chest easing as their misery unfolded without my interference. Justice didn't need my voice. It was already written across their faces. Weeks slipped by, and the chaos around Jason and Vanessa settled into something quieter, but far more pitiful. Their car disappeared from the curb, replaced with whispers about them bouncing between motels, dragging luggage from one cheap room to another. Bills piled up, credit collectors circled, and whatever shine their marriage once had dimmed into a constant shuffle for survival. Word of their struggles traveled easily in a town where gossip worked faster than any newspaper. For me, the silence was different. The apartment felt lighter without his shadow, the rooms no longer echoing with betrayal. I found myself able to breathe again, able to wake without the weight of humiliation pressing against my chest. Looking back, the memory of what he took still stung, but it no longer controlled me. That devastation had nearly crushed me, yet in the ashes, I found a strange kind of clarity. It wasn't revenge that defined me, though I couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching them unravel. It was the realization that I had endured, that I had turned every shattered piece into a weapon and built something steadier from it. The documents, the locks, the silence. Each step had pulled me out of the role of victim and set me firmly back in my own power. Jason's voice no longer haunted my phone. Vanessa's smirk no longer lived in my mind. They were reduced to cautionary tales, reminders of what entitlement and cruelty leave behind. Debt, shame, instability. Those were their companions now, and none of it belonged to me anymore. I started over slowly, grounding myself in small routines. Fresh paint on the walls, long walks at dusk, dinners with Rachel and Tom where laughter returned without effort. Trust wouldn't come easily again, but that was all right. Caution was better than blindness, and strength was better than naivete. One evening, sitting by the window with the breeze spilling in, I realized I felt something close to pride. Not for the suffering they endured, but for the way I refused to be erased by what they did. They tried to write me out of the story, yet here I was standing taller, carrying scars that proved survival. Betrayal had been the beginning, but it was not the ending. I had chosen that myself. Do you think I did the right thing by cutting them off, or should I have given them another chance? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories.